Attorney General Merrick Garland speaking for the first time about the FBI's search executed at former President Trump's Mar-a-Lago estate in South Florida, citing public interest in the matter.
Much of our work is by necessity conducted out of the public eye. We do that to protect the constitutional rights of all Americans and to protect the integrity of our investigations. Federal law, long-standing department rules, and our ethical obligations prevent me from providing further details as to the basis of the search at this time. There are, however, certain points I want you to know. First, I personally approved the decision to seek a search warrant in this matter.
Garland said the government has filed a motion to unseal the underlying warrant authorizing this week's search, which former President Trump has sharply criticized as a partisan attack. Garland also addressed recent attacks on the professionalism of the FBI and the Justice Department agents, and saying he will not stand by silently when their integrity is unfairly attacked. Joining me now is ABC's Zareen Shah, senior investigative reporter Josh Margolin, former FBI agent Brad Garrett, and attorney Jeff Robbins. Josh, I'd like to start with you. What is the most important element that you heard that stood out to you from the USAG?
It's the most surprising one. It's that the Justice Department, in response to the public clamoring for information and comments by former President Trump and people connected to him, the Justice Department has now gone into court to try to unseal these records. He's basically he's one-upping President Trump. The Justice Department is taking the president's words. He confirms the search. He talks about it. And now the Justice Department is saying that in the substantial public interest, that they would like a federal judge to release these records so that the American public can start to see actual documents and form their own opinion based on fact as to whether or not this search was warranted and appropriate. Not everyone's going to agree, but Garland was very, very clear that this was a step in response.
This was a step in response, and as you said, Josh, really important, if for no other reason than political messaging as well as legal ones. Jeff, what does unsealing this warrant mean? What are the next steps?
So having filed the request that the judge unseal or disclose publicly the filings, or at least the filings absent the detailed affidavit in support of probable cause, it then moves to former President Trump to take a position, to oppose it, to agree to it, to take a position somewhere in the middle. But it really does flush out the president, the former president. This really is, for all of the calm and the decency and the honor of the Attorney General, and he is all of those things, as are the professionals around him. This is an outflanking, in effect, of the former president by saying, okay, no problem. If you're going to say to the public some of this stuff about how there's nothing here, there was no basis for it, nothing was obtained, and you've confirmed that you have the search warrant, you have the receipt, but you declined to make it public, we'll help you out. We'll make it public for you. Now it's up to you. Tell the judge, do you oppose us disclosing it or not? So it's a smart move, as you say, Deirdre, politically and publicly, in terms of diluting some of these attacks that have been launched against the Department of Justice and the FBI.
Jeff, we're going to pick up on what you said. Bring in ABC News senior investigative reporter Aaron Kotarski. So, Aaron, how long is it going to take to unseal these documents?
It depends on whether the former president opposes the motion to unseal the search warrant and some of the underlying documents, and then how quickly the judge can rule. The judge in Florida, though, has already told the Justice Department that it wants a response by tomorrow in a separate matter, how they feel about unsealing some of this stuff, and now we know the answer. So the judge could rule really any day now, depending on what the former president's legal team decides. And then once the judge rules, the search warrant and the documents become available on the public docket.
So it could go very quickly, it could go very slowly, it just depends.
It just depends, really, and the ball is now in the former president's court to either oppose the motion that Garland is talking about, or to allow it and then let the public again see what this search was all about. But we know there were less invasive steps that preceded the search, which is a provocative, especially politically provocative step that the Justice Department undertook. We learned today that there was a subpoena for documents and another visit by the FBI to retrieve those documents in June. It's not clear what that subpoena was about, what documents are at issue, whether they're classified, what the nature of that classification is, or anything like that. But it does show that there were less invasive steps that the Justice Department tried to take to satisfy this case before resorting to this unprecedented search.
Aaron, I think that's a great point because, as many have pointed out, there could have been a resolution to this. We have to assume at some level that the former president's lawyers advised him essentially to ignore those steps. Is that a fair conclusion?
Well, we're not sure about what legal advice the former president may be getting, but a subpoena is not optional. And I think Jeff Robbins could probably speak to this better than I, but if there was a subpoena and the former president was ordered to turn over documents, clearly the FBI was not satisfied with what it got, because on Monday they had to go down once again to the former president's South Florida residence, and they were armed with this search warrant, and we may well see, at least in some part, what it is thereafter.
Jeff did point out earlier that that would have been terrible advice, but that said, at the end of the day, the sequence of events is what we have been reporting. Zareen, is the White House responding to this at all?
They're not. In fact, in that entire, 3 to 5 minute statement that we heard from the AG at the podium, he did not say Biden's name once. He didn't talk about the current White House. He said he personally approved that warrant. But what I think is so interesting, when we have a reporter lately on the ground with Larry Hogan, the governor of Maryland, and he's making it about the current president. Right before the AG stood up there and spoke, Hogan said he called on the Biden administration for more transparency regarding this FBI search at Trump's estate. And he said it's unprecedented. He said they do these raids, nearly every day, but they don't normally do them on a former president. I called on the Biden administration for more transparency. And so even though Biden is staying away from this issue, this happened now 3 days ago on Monday, he is not invoking the former president's name. We've not heard him say the word Trump once. He's touting his own accomplishments. It certainly appears that people who want to run for president, who've expressed wanting to run for president on the Republican side, people who aren't even Trump allies, are making this about Biden. They're making this about the current White House.
Jeff, coming back to you, we know the Department of Justice asking the federal court to unseal the warrant, but also for a list of items that were seized as part of the search. How much does that stand out to you?
Well, there is an inventory of what was taken. Given the nature of this particular matter, as has been pointed out, it's unlikely that you're going to have a great deal of specificity on that list. You're not going to see, I think it's fair to say, presidential orders for double cheeseburgers. You're also not going to see references to the nuclear code. So how they will finesse the listing of what they've taken will be interesting to see. But it is the case that given what has been wrongfully taken, apparently, and wrongfully withheld, apparently, in all likelihood, at least according to a federal judge, you're not going to see the kind of listing of materials that you would ordinarily see, and the way that receipt of materials taken is framed is going to reflect the particularly sensitive nature of this particular matter.
And Jeff, I know you just heard what I was discussing with Aaron, who rightly pointed out we have to assume that the FBI going to Mar-a-Lago was really a last resort, especially since we can confirm that the former president received that subpoena earlier this year.
Well, that's exactly right. That is the way this timeline looks, that documents, materials were taken, not double cheeseburger orders in January. There was an effort to retrieve documents. Documents were retrieved early in the year. It then turned out that there were documents that should have been provided by Mr. Trump and his organization weren't. That precipitated the subpoena. One might have imagined that there would have been compliance with the subpoena. As Aaron points out, it's not supposed to be optional. Compliance with federal law is also not supposed to be optional, but nevertheless, materials obviously were withheld. And it was only when the subpoena was not complied with that the Department of Justice did what it had to do, clearly, unless it was going to simply permit the former president to hold on to materials that under federal law he's not entitled to withhold.
Jeff, a bit of a parlor game question. Where will we be in 10 days?
My guess is that we're going to know more about what the basis was for the search warrant application. I say that only because the reporting of phenomenal journalists like on this network has been going full bore. And my guess is that we're going to find out more about who it was that evidently informed the Department of Justice that, guess what, surprise, surprise, when the former president said that he had complied with the subpoena, he hadn't. So my guess is we're going to learn more about that. And I'd be surprised, frankly, if it was the full 10 days that we had to wait before we learned more about that.
And Zareen, going back to you in D.C., this is a politically fraught moment, too, as we head towards midterms. What does this mean as far as some of these key races that we've been covering? What is the context?
It's going to be so hard to tell, right? But we know that that Biden has not talked about this yet, this search at Trump's estate. And we know that some of the people who want to jump in the race, Larry Hogan, I just mentioned, already has been amping up and talking about the White House and talking about Biden as it relates to this. So the president appears to be making a conscious effort to not go there. But I do want to also mention one more thing that we just saw come across. The FBI Agent Association now says, that there are threats against FBI agents, and they've released a statement basically saying that this should not be happening, that the threats recently contribute to an atmosphere where some have or will accept violence against law enforcement as appropriate. They say it's not. They released a further statement talking about that. And you heard the AG speak on that as well. He said he will not stand by silently while the FBI and the DOJ is doing their job. Clearly, this is something that is of high concern to them right now. We've already seen, we don't know if it's related, an incident breakout in Ohio, and now this statement from the FBI Agents Association.
Yeah, and we heard, of course, Merrick Garland say he will not stand by silently when the integrity is attacked. But, Zareen, what you're telling us is even underlining a more potential physical threat.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, he probably means both, right? I mean, he wants to put a sense of calm out there. He said he will not stand silently while the FBI and the DOJ while they're going through all of this, while they're just doing their job. And now you have even a stronger statement from the FBI Agents Association.
Josh, as we are talking about this, and as Zareen just mentioned, we really don't know if there is a connection between that incident earlier today in Ohio and the USAG's comments. But overall, this has been part of the vitriol, this politicization of both the Department of Justice and the FBI. How does this factor into our climate, the fact that many in our country, even people who really don't pay a lot of attention to politics, just feel like we're so split?
Well, absolutely. And in fact, the last couple of days, I've actually heard people who I know don't follow politics at all asking questions about what's going on with Trump and whether or not it was a legitimate thing. It is a legitimate question. The system is set up so that the American people can ask these questions. That is really at the core of what the Attorney General is arguing in these documents today by going to the court and saying, because of the public interest, the public should want to make sure that no matter what they feel about Donald Trump or anybody politically, that the Justice Department is not being political, that they have legitimate reasons for taking these really aggressive and intrusive actions like a search, like a federal investigation, whatever it is that they're doing. And I think it's really incumbent upon them. It was a pleasant surprise to see that the Attorney General is not simply saying more of things like, we're not going to comment. He came forward today and he said, we are going to comment. We now have called on a federal judge to release these records.
And Josh, as you pointed out earlier, I mean, this is really unusual, is it not?
Everything about this is unusual. The whole week has been one remarkable, unprecedented thing after another. It's unusual and remarkable and unprecedented that you have a former president's property raided by the FBI. Then yesterday we had, in an unrelated civil investigation, the former president spending hours pleading the Fifth Amendment, refusing to say anything on the grounds that it might incriminate him in this unrelated civil investigation. And now we have the unprecedented step of the Justice Department going to court seeking to unseal records that, as a matter of course, are never unsealed. We did the research. There was no grounds, for instance, for news organizations to go into court to try to get a judge to open up the records. We thought we might have a way in. There was no way in. This doesn't happen. But what happened this week doesn't happen.
What happened this week doesn't happen. Really well put. Of course, Josh, Brad, quickly here, the AG mentioning these attacks on the professionalism of the FBI agents. As somebody who served, what do you make of that?
Well, I think what he's trying to do is say that these are dedicated people that on some days risk their life to protect the country, and that he wanted to drive home that point. You know, unfortunately, it has nothing to do with the AG, is that the people who potentially want to harm FBI agents or folks in the DOJ won't care what AG Garland says or what anybody else says, because they're convinced that collectively the system is rigged, and it's all driven by some sort of deep state, so none of it's legitimate is the word I'm looking for. So whatever is said today won't matter with future versions of perhaps this guy in Ohio that's just mad at the FBI for totally illogical, irrational reasons, but that won't stop the next guy trying the same thing.
Brad, we thank you. Brad Garrett, Josh Margolin, Aaron Katarski, Zoreen Shah, Jeff Robbins, thank you all. We have been covering this breaking news. We'll be back in just 2 minutes with more.
Hi, everyone. George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.